The situation in Ferguson, Missouri is not a new phenomenon in the United States of America. And I think that part of the analysis of what has gone on after the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson is not necessarily erroneous nor necessarily unrelated to the proper narrative. But I think there's something that has been left out of the narrative. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, at least so that we can understand how this plays in the context of American history, is to say that after the end of the enslavement in 1865, and there were no longer paddy rollers, as they were called, going around from plantation to plantation looking for African people. The police forces of most of the American towns and cities were established with one fundamental purpose, and that is how to keep under control large numbers of African American people who had been recently in bondage. And this has been fundamentally the attitude, I think, of the police forces for a long time. But there is something else that converged with this. In the 1970s and 80s, and early part of the 90s, was that the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, was basically sued by many civil rights organizations. And these civil rights organizations that sued the Ku Klux Klan essentially shut it down as far as visible, overt Ku Klux Klan individuals running around the nation with hoods on and white robes. So the question is, where did they go? If they went underground, if they had felt that since the 1870s they had a free reign to essentially kill, harass black people, and they now no longer can do it because they are legally defunct because of the suits that were brought against them. What happens to the sentiments in the white population that believes strongly in white racial domination? It is my contention that many of these individuals went into the police force. They go into the police force with the same attitudes and the same beliefs that their ancestors had had regarding the relationship between the races in the United States of America. This is our problem. Our problem is not simply the fact of the militarization of the police force. We get the militarization of the police force because we also have the attitudes against African people in the police forces that see African people as the enemies of the state. And consequently, they believe that as the black people are enemies of the state, they have to have some way to respond to African American people. And so we get this militarization. Now, all of these things are mythical. I mean, in fact, they are based on very false premises, and they not only are based on false premises, but they really are based on a racist understanding of America and of the African American population particularly, because the African American population has been in many ways one of the populations in this country with least violence against the state. So I raise this question of the convergence of the mental attitude and the psychological attitude of many white police officers by suggesting that perhaps some of our studies and some of our analysis based simply on the militarization of the police force, or the fact that there is an absence of black police in a police force, may very well be if not erroneous, certainly not the full narrative. The full narrative must consider the fact that there needs to be psychological tests for racism itself before a person can become a police officer. Because ultimately, racism, as it has been expressed in American society, and I believe in any society, is an abnormal condition. And as an abnormal condition, psychological condition, people who have racial hatred or who believe in racial supremacy have no place in the police forces of any society.